I never thought the worst day of my life would happen at my own sister's wedding. But there I was, standing in a beautiful manor house in the Cotswolds, wearing a bridesmaid dress I'd paid for myself, watching my entire family laugh as Victoria called me unwanted. The word echoed through that ornate reception hall like a death sentence, and in that moment, something inside me shifted forever. I'm Emma. And this is the story of how my little sister's cruelty became the catalyst for the most calculated revenge I've ever executed. I'd always been the responsible one, the daughter who worked hard, put herself through university, became a chartered accountant, married young, divorced quietly, and never caused any trouble. Victoria, 3 years younger, had been the golden child from the moment she was born. She was beautiful, charismatic, and knew exactly how to wrap our parents around her finger. Where I was practical and reserved, she was vibrant and demanding. Where I saved money, she spent it like water, and our parents loved her more for it. I watched for 32 years as Mom and Dad gave her everything she wanted while teaching me that love had to be earned through achievement and compliance. When Victoria wanted to be an influencer instead of going to university, they supported her completely. When I wanted to study accounting, they told me I'd have to take out loans because they'd already spent my education fund on Victoria's gap year in Australia. I did it anyway, worked 2 jobs, graduated with honors, and they barely came to my graduation because Victoria had a photo shoot that same weekend. The pattern continued into adulthood. I bought a modest flat in Reading after my divorce, something I could afford on my salary. Victoria lived rent-free in Mom and Dad's renovated basement, which they'd turned into a luxury apartment for her, complete with ring lights and a walk-in wardrobe for her content creation. She made decent money from Instagram and TikTok, posting about luxury lifestyle despite never having worked a real job. But somehow she was always broke, and our parents always bailed her out. Then Victoria got engaged to James Pemberton, and everything accelerated. James was everything our parents had ever dreamed of for Victoria. He came from old money, worked in investment banking, drove a Porsche, and looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Victoria met him at some influencer event in London, and within 3 months, he'd proposed with a ring that cost more than my car. Our parents were ecstatic. The engagement party was my first warning that something had shifted in Victoria. It was held at our parents' house, a catered affair with over 100 guests. Victoria greeted me at the door wearing a designer dress I knew cost thousands. "Oh, Emma, you're here," she said, her voice dripping with something I couldn't quite identify. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I know these kinds of events aren't really your scene, not glamorous enough." She looked me up and down, taking in my sensible dress from Marks and Spencer. "That's sweet. We've put you at table 12, with some of James's colleagues who are also single. Thought you might appreciate that after your divorce." The comment stung, but I kept smiling. Table 12 turned out to be at the very back of the garden, partially behind a hedge with people I'd never met. I watched Victoria and James hold court at the center of everything, watched my parents glow with pride, and felt like a ghost at my own sister's celebration. Things got worse when the wedding planning began. Victoria asked me to be a bridesmaid, which I initially took as an olive branch. The first bridesmaid meeting was at a boutique in Knightsbridge. The dresses Victoria had chosen cost £800 each. I just paid for a major repair on my flat's heating system and was watching my budget carefully. But I didn't want to cause problems. I quietly asked Victoria if there were any alternative options. She stared at me like I'd suggested wearing bin bags. "Emma, this is my wedding, my one special day. Are you really going to be difficult about a dress? God, you're always so worried about money." Maybe if you'd worked harder or married better, you wouldn't have these problems. The other bridesmaids, all Victoria's influencer friends, laughed nervously. I felt my face burn with humiliation, but I swallowed it down and agreed to buy the dress. I put it on a credit card I'd just paid off. The hen party was worse. Victoria wanted a weekend in Ibiza, staying at a luxury resort. My share was going to be over £1,000. I couldn't afford it, not without going into serious debt, so I approached her privately and explained the situation. "You're kidding," she said flatly. We were in a coffee shop near our parents' house, and she didn't bother lowering her voice. "You can't afford my hen party? Emma, what do you even spend your money on? You have no life, no social expenses. This is pathetic. I have bills, Vicky. A mortgage, utilities, student loans still. I can't just—" "You know what? Forget it. Don't come. I don't need you bringing down the vibe anyway with your poverty mindset. Everyone else can afford it because they've made something of themselves." I left that coffee shop in tears. When I told Sarah about it that evening over wine at my flat, she was furious. "You need to set boundaries with her," Sarah said firmly. "She's treating you like rubbish, and your parents enable it. You don't have to accept this." "She's my sister," I said weakly. "And it's her wedding. After this, things will go back to normal." Sarah gave me a look that said she knew better, but she didn't push it. I didn't go to Ibiza. Victoria didn't speak to me for 3 weeks afterward, and when she finally did, it was to inform me that I was still expected to fulfill my bridesmaid duties, including helping with setup the day before the wedding and giving a speech at the reception. I agreed, because that's what I always did. The week before the wedding, I discovered something by accident. I was at my parents' house dropping off some decorations Victoria had ordered to the wrong address. She wasn't home, but her laptop was open on the kitchen table, and as I walked past, I saw my name in an Instagram message on the screen. I shouldn't have looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. The message was to one of her bridesmaids. Victoria had written, "Honestly, can't wait for this wedding to be over. Having Emma as a bridesmaid is such a chore. She's so boring and poor, and she brings down the aesthetic in all the photos. James's family already thinks I come from money, and then they see my tragic divorced sister and I have to explain that she's the embarrassment of the family. Mom and Dad feel the same way, but won't say it. After the wedding, I'm done pretending we're close. She's basically unwanted anyway, always has been." I stood in that kitchen, reading those words over and over, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Unwanted. She'd called me unwanted. My own sister, the person I'd protected and supported and loved despite everything, thought I was an embarrassment. The worst part was that I believed her about Mom and Dad. It explained so much about my childhood, about the way they'd always made me feel like I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. I took a photograph of the screen with my phone. I don't know why. Some instinct told me I might need evidence later. Then I left the decorations on the table and drove home, where I sat in my car outside my flat and cried for an hour. That night, Sarah came over without being asked. I showed her the message, watched her face go through shock, anger, and finally, cold fury. "You're not going to that wedding," she said immediately. "I can't just not go. I'm a bridesmaid. It would cause a massive scene." "You're already the villain in their story," Sarah said quietly. "You just don't want to accept it." She was right, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, I made a decision. I'm going to the wedding, I'm going to smile and play my role perfectly. But after that, I'm done. But I was lying to myself. I couldn't just let it go. Over the next week, I found myself observing everything with new eyes. I watched James hover in the background, looking increasingly stressed, always on his phone, always stepping away to take calls. When Victoria asked him about it, he'd get defensive, saying it was work. Then there was the money. Victoria kept talking about the wedding costing over £80,000, but I'd overheard Dad telling Mum that they'd had to remortgage the house to help pay for it. When I'd asked Dad about it carefully, he'd admitted that James had temporary cash flow issues, but that it would all be sorted after the wedding. I'm an accountant. Cash flow issues with someone who drives a Porsche and wears a Rolex set off alarm bells. So I did something I'm not entirely proud of. I used my professional database access to run a basic credit check on James Pemberton. What I found made my blood run cold. James was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, loan defaults, county court judgments. His salary was decent, but not spectacular, and he was spending far beyond his means. The Porsche was leased and behind on payments. There was no family money. His parents owned a modest semi-detached in Hampshire. James Pemberton was a con artist, and my sister was about to marry him without having any idea who he really was. My first instinct was to tell her. Despite everything, she was still my sister. But then I remembered that word. Unwanted. I remembered 32 years of being second best, of being the embarrassment, and I made a different decision. I spent the next 3 days gathering everything I could find about James. I contacted former colleagues, found his social media accounts, traced his employment history. The picture that emerged was of a man who lived entirely on credit and lies, who'd been fired from his previous firm for irregularities, who owed money to multiple lenders. I compiled it all into a folder on my laptop, screenshots and documents and credit reports. And I decided I would give Victoria one chance. One single opportunity to apologize, to show some shred of remorse or kindness. If she took it, I'd warn her about James and walk away quietly. If she didn't, I'd let her find out the hard way. The wedding day arrived. It was perfect, of course. The venue was a restored manor house in the Cotswolds, all honeystone and manicured gardens. I arrived early with the other bridesmaids to help Victoria get ready. She looked stunning in her dress. For a moment, watching her in front of the mirror, I felt a pang of sisterly affection. "You look beautiful, Vicky," I said quietly. She glanced at me in the mirror. "Thanks. You look nice. The dress fits better than I expected." I took a breath. "Listen, can we talk for a minute? Privately? It's important. It's about James." Something flickered across her face. "What about James? Can we just step outside for a second?" She sighed dramatically, but followed me out to the hallway. We stood in an alcove overlooking the gardens. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen. I found out some things about James that I think you should know before you marry him, things about his finances, his past." "Oh my God," she interrupted, and she was laughing. "You're jealous. You're so jealous that you're trying to sabotage my wedding. Emma, this is sad even for you. I'm not jealous. I'm trying to help you. James isn't who you think he is. He's in serious debt. He's lied about his background, and I have proof." "I don't want to hear this," she said, her voice rising. "You can't stand that I'm happy, that I'm marrying someone successful and wonderful while you're alone and struggling. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're making up lies to ruin my day. Vicky, please, just look at the information I have." She stepped closer to me, and her face was ugly with anger. "Get away from me. You're pathetic. You've always been pathetic. Mom and Dad were right about you." There it was. Right about what? That you're the mistake, the child they had before they were ready, before they knew what they wanted. They told me once when I was 16, "You were never wanted, Emma. You were an obligation they fulfilled, and I was the daughter they actually chose to have." And you know what? It shows. It shows in everything about you. You're small and scared and boring, and I'm so tired of pretending I care. I felt like I was falling. They said that? Not in those exact words, but yes. And they're right. Look at you. You bring nothing to this family except disappointment and awkwardness. After today, I don't want to see you anymore. You're not invited to my house. You're not invited to holidays. You're done. Consider yourself cut off. She turned and walked back into the bridal suite, leaving me standing in that hallway with my world crashing down. I stood there for several minutes, shaking, trying to breathe. Then I went to the bathroom, fixed my makeup, and made a decision. I wasn't going to warn her. I wasn't going to save her. I was going to let her marry James. Let her discover the truth herself. And then I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she was. The ceremony was beautiful. Victoria cried during the vows, and James looked like the perfect groom. I stood with the other bridesmaids and smiled and played my part. No one watching would have known that anything was wrong. The reception was where everything exploded. Dinner was served, speeches were scheduled, and Victoria was holding court at the head table. I waited until after the best man's speech, after the laughter and applause had died down. Then I stood up. I wasn't scheduled to give a speech, but I stood up anyway, and I tapped my glass until the room fell silent. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice steady. "I know I wasn't supposed to speak today, but I'm Victoria's sister, and I have a few things I'd like to say." Victoria's face went pale. She started to stand, but James pulled her back down. Our parents looked confused. I saw Sarah at her table, her expression a mixture of shock and concern. "I've known Victoria her whole life," I continued. "I've watched her grow from a spoiled child into a spoiled adult. I've watched our parents give her everything she ever wanted while teaching me that love is conditional. And I've stayed quiet about it because I loved my family and I wanted to believe that deep down they loved me too." "Emma, sit down," Dad called out, his voice sharp. But I ignored him. But then I found out something interesting. I found out that Victoria thinks I'm unwanted, that I'm an embarrassment, that I'm boring and poor and someone she's done pretending to care about. She told me this today, actually, just a few hours ago, right before her wedding. And you know what? I am done pretending. The room was completely silent now. Victoria was staring at me with pure hatred. I'm also done pretending that I don't know the truth about other people. So, Victoria, since you've been so honest with me, let me be honest with you. Your husband is lying to you. James doesn't have family money. He's over £200,000 in debt. He's been fired from his previous job for fraud, and he owes money to at least 7 different creditors. The Porsche? Leased and about to be repossessed. The family estate? It's a 3-bedroom semi where his retired postal worker parents live. You've married a con artist, and Mom and Dad have remortgaged their house to pay for a wedding to a man who saw you all as an easy mark. The room erupted. James jumped to his feet, shouting that I was lying. Victoria was screaming at me. Guests were pulling out their phones. My parents were trying to restore order, but it was chaos. I walked calmly to the microphone at the front of the room, pulled out my phone, and connected it to the venue's AV system. "I have proof," I said simply. And then I displayed every document I'd gathered. Credit reports on the screens around the room, screenshots of James's real social media accounts, letters from creditors, his actual employment history. James tried to grab my phone, but Sarah had anticipated this. She'd moved through the crowd and was standing next to me, blocking him. "Touch her, and I'll have you arrested for assault," she said calmly. "I'm a solicitor, and there are 200 witnesses here." The evidence spoke for itself. Guests were gasping, talking among themselves. Victoria was crying now, real tears. She looked at James, who had gone completely pale. "Is it true?" she whispered. "James, is any of this true?" He didn't answer. He looked around the room at all the watching faces, at the evidence displayed on every screen, and he ran. Literally ran out of the reception hall, leaving Victoria standing there in her wedding dress, humiliated in front of everyone she knew. The room was in complete chaos. I walked over to Victoria slowly. "I tried to warn you," I said quietly, so only she could hear. "I gave you a chance to listen, to treat me with basic kindness. You called me unwanted instead. So I let you marry him, and now you get to live with the consequences of your cruelty." "You're a monster," she spat at me. "No," I said. "You did this to yourself. I just stopped protecting you from the truth." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm. "You've ruined everything. My marriage, my reputation, my life." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. "Good. I don't want your forgiveness. I want you to remember this moment every time you think about treating someone as less than human." I pulled away and walked out of that reception hall with my head held high. Sarah followed me immediately, and we got into her car and drove away from that disaster. "That was either the bravest or most insane thing I've ever seen," Sarah said as we drove. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I will be." The aftermath was spectacular. The wedding guests had recorded everything and posted it online. Within hours, #UnwantedSister was trending on Twitter. Victoria's influencer career imploded overnight. People found the messages she'd sent about me, found other examples of her cruelty, and she was canceled faster than I'd thought possible. James disappeared completely. I later found out he'd fled the country to avoid prosecution for fraud. The debts he'd accumulated were real, and several creditors came after Victoria. She hadn't known about his activities, but that didn't stop the legal mess that followed. My parents tried to call me, but I didn't answer. Eventually, Dad showed up at my flat. "You had no right to do that," he said. "To humiliate your sister like that, to destroy her wedding. We raised you better than this." "No, you didn't," I said calmly. "You raised me to be invisible and grateful for scraps. You raised Victoria to be a monster. You're reaping what you sowed." "She's devastated. The wedding has to be annulled. People are calling her a gold digger, and her career is destroyed. You did this out of jealousy. I did this because she's cruel, and because you enabled her cruelty my entire life." "Did she tell you what she said to me? Did she mention calling me unwanted? Did she tell you that she confirmed you both see me as a mistake?" Dad looked uncomfortable. "She told us. And yes, we may have said some things years ago that we shouldn't have. But you were never unwanted, Emma. We love you." "You have a funny way of showing it. 32 years of favoritism, of making me feel like I had to earn what Victoria got for free. I'm done, Dad. I'm done with family dinners where I'm an afterthought, done with being compared to her and coming up short, done with pretending we're normal." "So what, you're just cutting us off?" "I'm setting boundaries. Something I should have done years ago. You made your choice about which daughter mattered. Live with it." He left looking older than when he'd arrived. I felt a pang of guilt, but Sarah's voice in my head reminded me that boundaries weren't cruel. They were necessary. The weeks that followed were strange. I blocked Victoria and my parents on everything and focused on rebuilding my life. Work became my sanctuary. Then, about 6 weeks after the wedding, I got a letter from Victoria. An actual handwritten letter. I debated throwing it away unopened, but curiosity won. "Emma," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry for everything I said to you. You were right. I was cruel. I was entitled. I treated you like you didn't matter because it made me feel better about myself. The wedding forced me to see things clearly. Without the followers, without the attention, I had to look at who I actually am. And I didn't like what I saw. I've been in therapy, trying to work through why I became this person. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from all of us. You were the responsible one, the kind one, the one who actually made something of herself. And I resented you for it. I'm not asking you to be my sister again. I'm just asking that you know I understand now. I understand what I did was unforgivable, and I understand that you had every right to protect yourself. I hope you're happy, Emma. You're not unwanted. You never were. Victoria." I read the letter 3 times. Part of me wanted to believe she'd changed, but another part wondered if this was just another manipulation. In the end, I decided it didn't matter. Whether Victoria had truly changed or not wasn't my problem anymore. I'd set my boundaries, I'd stood up for myself, and I'd walked away. I did write back, though, just once. "Victoria, I received your letter. I appreciate the apology, but an apology doesn't erase 32 years of hurt. I'm glad you're reflecting on your behavior, but I'm not ready to have you in my life again. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe it won't. Take care of yourself. Emma." I sent it, and then put the whole situation out of my mind. 6 months later, I got a promotion at work. It came with a significant pay rise and the opportunity to lead my own team. I celebrated with Sarah over dinner, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy. "You look different," Sarah observed. "Lighter." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've been carrying this weight my whole life, and I finally put it down. The wedding was awful, and I know people think I'm vindictive, but honestly, I'd do it again." She needed to face consequences, and I needed to stop being the one who suffered in silence. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said simply. "You deserved better than they were giving you." I smiled at her. "Thank you for always being on my side. You're more family than they ever were." Life moved on. I threw myself into work, started dating again casually, and even began therapy myself. My therapist helped me see that I'd been conditioned from childhood to accept less than I deserved. Undoing that conditioning was hard work, but it was worth it. I heard through acquaintances that Victoria had moved out of our parents' house and was working a regular job for the first time. My parents had lost their house in the remortgage situation and had downsized to a small flat. I felt a flicker of guilt, but I reminded myself that they'd made their choices. A year after the wedding, I ran into Victoria at a coffee shop in London. I almost didn't recognize her. She was dressed normally, in jeans and a jumper, her hair pulled back simply. No designer labels, just a woman getting coffee before work. We stared at each other for a long moment. "Emma," she said quietly. "Hi." "Hi, Vicky. You look well." "Thanks. So do you, actually." She laughed, self-deprecating. "I look normal. Turns out when you're not performing all the time, you can just exist." "How are you doing?" She considered seriously. "Better than I was. Not great, but better. I'm working in an office, doing social media management. It's boring but stable." I'm paying off debts, going to therapy, trying to figure out who I am. Some days are harder than others. I'm glad you're doing the work. I meant what I said in my letter. I really am sorry. I know you probably don't believe me, but I am. I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I took a breath. I believe you're sorry. I believe you've learned something. But Victoria, I need you to understand that sorry doesn't fix everything. You spent 32 years making me feel worthless. That doesn't go away with an apology and a year of therapy. I know, she said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to do better. Then I hope you do. Everyone deserves the chance to grow. Just understand that I'm not going to be part of that journey. I've built a life without the toxicity, and I need to protect that. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. For standing up for yourself. You were always the strong one. We stood there for another moment, and then she gave me a small smile and left. I watched her go, feeling complicated emotions. I didn't regret what I'd done. She'd needed consequences. But I could acknowledge she was trying to change, even if I wasn't willing to let her back in. That encounter gave me closure. I realized my revenge hadn't just been about humiliating Victoria. It had been about reclaiming my worth, about refusing to be unwanted anymore. And in doing that, I'd freed not just myself, but maybe her too. 2 years after the wedding, I met someone. His name was David. He was a teacher, and he was genuinely kind. He knew about my family situation because the wedding video had gone viral, but he never judged me for it. You chose yourself, he said one evening. That's brave. Some people think it was cruel, I reminded him. Some people have never been made to feel unwanted by the people who are supposed to love them, he countered. You gave her a chance. She chose cruelty. Natural consequences followed. I loved him more in that moment. We got engaged after a year together. Small proposal, just us on a beach in Cornwall, and it was perfect. When we planned the wedding, I had to decide about inviting my family. I sent an invitation to my parents with a note. You're welcome to attend if you can respect my boundaries and treat David and me with the same love you always showed Victoria. If you can't, please decline respectfully. They declined. The note said they didn't feel comfortable given the history. I understood. They still couldn't acknowledge their part. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying years ago. I moved their names to the declined list and focused on people who would be there. Sarah as my maid of honor, colleagues who'd become friends, David's warm family. Victoria sent a card. Not a response, just a card before the wedding. I heard you're getting married. I'm so happy for you. You deserve all the joy in the world. I won't come because I don't think my presence would be welcome, but I'm wishing you well. Victoria. I put the card in a drawer. It was kind and probably genuine, but it didn't change anything. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, and that was okay. The wedding was beautiful, small, intimate, filled with people who genuinely cared. David's vows made me cry, and when I said mine, promising mutual respect and partnership, I meant every word. As we danced, David whispered, "Any regrets?" I looked around at happy faces, felt his arms around me, and smiled. Not a single one. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not even about your family? I considered seriously. I regret they couldn't be better people. I regret I wasted years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret refusing to be unwanted anymore. He kissed me softly. Good. Because you're the most wanted person in my world. It's been 3 years now since Victoria's wedding. I'm 35, happily married, and I've just been made partner at my firm. Sarah is still my best friend. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who value me. I see updates about Victoria occasionally. She's still working, still in therapy, dating someone normal and kind. I'm glad for her. Not enough to reach out, but glad. She needed to hit rock bottom to learn empathy. My parents are still together, aged considerably. I heard they regret how things turned out, but they've never reached out directly. Some people can't admit when they're wrong. I've made peace with being the unwanted daughter who chose herself. Because here's what I learned. Being unwanted by people who can't see your worth isn't a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their limitations. Victoria called me unwanted, but what she meant was, I didn't fit into her shallow world. And thank God for that. The revenge I took wasn't just about exposing James or humiliating her. It was about refusing to be silenced. It was about saying loudly and publicly that I mattered, that my feelings mattered, that cruelty has consequences. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I do it differently? Maybe less dramatically. But then again, perhaps the public nature was necessary. Victoria had spent years performing her perfect life online. I simply revealed the truth. The best revenge is living well. And I am living well. I have a career I'm proud of, a marriage built on respect, friends who care, and most importantly, self-respect. I'm no longer the woman who accepts crumbs. I'm no longer the sister who stays silent. I'm no longer the daughter who begs for approval. I'm Emma Collins, and I am not unwanted. I am chosen every day by people who know my worth. And that's the greatest revenge of all, not the exposure or humiliation, but the simple act of building a life so full of genuine love that the people who rejected me become irrelevant. Victoria called me unwanted at her wedding. What I did next didn't just silence her, it freed me. And that freedom was worth every moment of chaos that followed. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty. They ask if I went too far, if I should have handled it differently. My answer is always the same. I protected myself from people who were hurting me, and I did it in the only way that created change. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's self-preservation. Families can be toxic. The people who are supposed to love us can hurt us most deeply. And we're taught, especially as women, to accept that hurt in silence, to keep the peace. But keeping the peace when you're the only one getting hurt isn't peace. It's capitulation. I chose myself. I chose my dignity. I chose to expose the truth rather than continue being crushed under lies. And yes, it was dramatic. Yes, it destroyed relationships that were already broken. But it also set me free. It allowed me to build a new life with people who value me. It taught Victoria consequences she'd never learned. It showed me I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. So when people ask about the wedding, about my revenge, I smile and tell them the truth. I'd do it in a heartbeat. Because the woman I am now, the life I have now, the peace I feel now, all of it came from that moment when I refused to be unwanted anymore. That's not just a revenge story, that's a survival story. And I survived by choosing myself, finally, after 32 years of choosing everyone else. Victoria called me unwanted. What I did next didn't just silence her, it saved me. And that's the ending I focus on, not the drama of that day, but the peace of every day since when I wake up knowing I am exactly where I belong. I am not unwanted. I never was. I was just in the wrong family, and realizing that, accepting it, acting on it, was the most powerful thing I've ever done. I am not unwanted. I am chosen. And that makes all the difference.